Hey, welcome back. My name is Margo, and I am one of the co-founders here at IndieBirth. And this is the second episode in a series all about reimagining midwifery. And this week, I'm going to talk about what does it really mean to be a midwife? Or in other words, what does the word midwife mean when I use that word or when I claim that word for myself? And this may seem like an introductory sort of topic, but I actually think, and the more I was sort of prepping to make this episode, I actually think this is at the heart of everything that we talk about here at IndieBirth, and I know it's at the heart of what my life journey has been up until this point. And without getting way into it, because I think I'm going to talk more about it in another episode, my journey into birth started in 2011. That's right, yes, a long time ago now. And I think that this actually is important to this topic of what does it mean to be a midwife, because what I thought it meant to be a midwife when I started on the midwifery journey is different than what I think of the word midwife now. What are we, 14 years later down the road? And so, zooming back in time, when I first got interested in birth, it was because I was at sort of a critical point in time where I wasn't sure what my path was going to be. I was on track to do something totally different. I mean, arguably not totally different, but I was on track to do domestic violence policy work, and I was in a graduate program, and I had at least a vague outline of what the next 5 to 10 years was going to look like for me. And as it happens, I'm sure you've had experiences like this in your life, it just became clear to me, kind of like a lightning bolt in one moment, that this was not actually what was right for me. I remember standing at the bus stop, waiting for the campus bus to come pick me up after a class, and being like, I'm gonna finish this semester, but I don't think this is actually what's next for me. And the way my brain works, it started sort of like Rolodexing, like, well, what else could I do instead then? Sort of anxiously. And I had been in my senior year of a women's studies program. I had been in a cohort, and in this capstone class, another woman, for one of her projects, for her big final project of the program, talked about being a doula and talked about the politics around VBACs in our town, vaginal births after cesarean births. And I don't recall exactly the circumstances, but that memory came back to me when I was seated at my Dell laptop trying to figure out what to do with my life. This memory of this woman and how that had stirred something in me. It had fanned a flame and had made me really mad that women weren't able to make that choice for themselves about their births in the town where we lived and in the hospital that we had available there. And so I'd originally started looking at maybe becoming a doula, but I think even within the first night of the frantic Googling, that was ruled out for me as an option. I very quickly was like, yeah, midwifery, how does that work? What is that? So I came in knowing nothing, less than nothing. I had heard a little bit about birth growing up, but I had no idea about natural birth, health healing, that kind of thing. Although I did have a little bit of a background in like herbalism and some different kind of alternative health stuff from my own health journey up until that point. So I'm sitting there, I'm 21 years old, and I'm like, yeah, midwives, okay. So I checked out every book in the library on campus about midwifery and birth, and I read a bunch of books, and one of them that I read was Spiritual Midwifery. And like many people who read that book, I just had this instant like recognition that this was really, really inspirational for me and was something that was going to change the trajectory of my life. So this vision, this like sort of romanticized, and I would argue over-romanticized vision of what midwifery might look like is painted in this book, Spiritual Midwifery by Ina May Gaskin. If you haven't read it, it's probably worth a read. And it talks about how she and others in this caravan of hippies, came to offer midwifery to the women in their community and actually on their commune, and how they kind of put that knowledge together and what these births looked like when they were coming at it from the worldview that this group of people shared. So it hit a lot of interesting notes for me. I was also really interested in intentional communities at the time. I still am. And anything countercultural and history and like women doing rad shit. And so it was great. I also have a critique of the book out there if you want to read it. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. An article called, I think, Spiritual Midwifery Side Eye. So I won't get into that right now. But that was my entry into midwifery. I read that book. I mentioned something to the right person. They said I should meet with Marin. And bada bing, bada boom, the semester closed out, and very quickly, right after break, I didn't go back, and instead, I think it was January 1st, I know it was January 1st, 2011, 1111, I started going to prenatals with Marin, and, sorry, Siri must be listening to me from over there, that's so weird, and so after, Siri got me distracted. After that, I went to a birth in February for the first time ever. And it's been I've been going to births since then, although I paused about a year and a half ago. So what I thought midwifery was then, it's bringing to mind a story, a birth where a mom was bleeding a little bit more than we would have liked. And I remember like channeling the Ina May Gaskin spiritual midwife, archetype, and just sort of like sitting with her. And I wasn't in charge of anything clinical, and just being like, I got to make sure the vibe in the room is right. If you haven't read it, that might not make sense, but it was very psychedelic the way she painted it, and very simple, and like I said, very over romanticized. But so I was like sort of channeling, like, that's what it is to be in this birth space in this moment. I'm going to be a midwife like this. And that's really sweet and wonderful. And we need people who feel that way and are excited about birth in that way and are naive in that way. But where I am now is a very different place. So I just told you a lot about my sort of entry into midwifery, what I thought it meant. And so let me actually show you. I made a little printout for us all. It's like very old fashioned instead of sharing my screen. So I'm just gonna hold this here for a second. Hopefully it's not mirrored. Oh, that'll be annoying if it is. I'll have to figure out how to flip it. Okay, so I have here home birth midwifery in this pink circle. I have obstetrics here, OBGYNs, this bigger green circle. Inside of that, I have nurse midwifery. Got nursing here in the yellow circle. And you can see there's overlap. And then there's also this little heart here that's doulas. And so you can see there's overlap. There is difference. And this is sort of how I thought about midwifery when I got into midwifery. I was going to be a home birth midwife. That meant I was going to be outside of the system. There's very little overlap. And I also thought very often, one more little look at that before I put it down, very often in terms of home versus hospital, this sort of binary thinking of home and hospital, and how the kind of midwifery I wanted to do was home birth midwifery. And that is what I have done. So that was sort of the framework, and that is the dominant framework. This is how most people think about midwifery. Well, I mean, people might change the amount of overlap, and maybe other people would make this differently. That'd be interesting to see. But I think this is a generally accepted understanding. But I also think it's interesting that when I made it, I put these on opposing sides. Again, sort of this like one versus the other. And like I said, the way that you kind of take a path into midwifery is forced, or it felt that way, externally at least, to choose, like, I'm going to be a home birth midwife, and within that, there's a lot of distinction. You can be a traditional midwife. You can be a certified professional midwife, a CPM. You can go to a MEAC accredited school. You cannot go to a MEAC accredited school. When I first was starting out, there were still people being grandmothered in also, I believe, with like licensure. You can be a licensed midwife, unlicensed midwife. So home birth midwifery has a lot of other stratification within it too. But that was the main initial choice you had to make, a bifurcation of I'm a home birth midwife or I'm a hospital birth midwife. And there's two different tracks. CPM is the main one that most people think of when they think of home birth midwifery, although I chose not to become certified, more on that another day. Or nurse midwifery, most of whom practice in the hospital. Sometimes they practice at home. And within our system here in the United States, that's the way it typically looks. It looks different in other countries. I'm not going to get into that right now. So as I got deeper into the world of midwifery, became a midwife in my own right, and was practicing, more and more of this started to bother me. And a lot of the conversation happening in the midwifery world is around smoothing out transfers of care, having continuity of care so that, you know, the midwife can go with if somebody has a transport into the hospital, if they need to be in the hospital for their birth. They start at home and they end up at the hospital. How do we make that smooth? How do we integrate, is the word often that we're hearing, integrate midwifery into the existing Western medical model through, you know, even if it is autonomous, you know, licensing, regulation, and, you know, fostering these connections between home birth midwives and the hospital. Other countries have answered this question differently. And I don't know that I prefer the way that they do it, but most of them have really integrated it fully so that the same midwife who is at your home birth would actually also be your midwife in the hospital. There's not really a distinction between home birth midwives and hospital birth midwives as much as is the case here in the United States. So near the end of my time in practice in Minnesota, which was about 7 years, at the end of that, I really started, I'm trying to think even how to articulate this. I'm going to show you a different model in a second. Hold your horses. I started thinking a lot about what was missing for me, because I did want midwifery to feel spiritual. I wanted it to feel political, like it was an extension of like my work here on earth. And it had been, it's just, it became clear that something was missing. Something was not quite as effective or impactful as I really wanted it to be. And I started searching and seeking different modalities and tools and understandings and frameworks for the world that could make it more exciting to be a midwife and to make it feel more like the midwifery that I was envisioning for the future. And so I think I talked about this guy last week too, but Charles Eisenstein is a thinker that I really resonate with and really feel is inspiring. And he has a book called, I believe it's a book called The More Beautiful World We Know Is Possible, something like that. But this phrase of a more beautiful world that we know is possible, I started thinking about a more beautiful midwifery that we know is possible in this world that is founded on reciprocity and abundance, gift economy, communities, a return to the sacred, living in tune with the rhythms of the earth and nature. These things that feel like I probably won't see them in my lifetime, but it feels like if I don't orient to them as what is possible, that makes the work that I'm doing on a daily basis not meaningful to me. And so I was really asking this question, like, how do I embody a more beautiful midwifery that we know is possible? And I don't have all the answers. So if you're hoping that I'm like, here's the recipe for this, I don't have all the answers, but I do have a little bit of insight from my own exploration. So I'm going to show you another version of this. So midwifery. Here we have the more beautiful midwifery we know is possible. And this is like a bigger circle. It was so big it can't even fit on the page. Giant, expansive circle. We have the same things we have had down here. And I think if you watched the first week, you can know why this wasn't like quite cutting it for me, right? Like home birth midwifery just is not where it's at right now. It's not life affirming. It's really fear-based. And instead of trying to reform it and nudge it along what feels like the right direction, it feels really freeing to actually be like, you know what, actually, I'm actually talking about something else. We are talking about something else here at Indie Birth. So when we call our midwifery school a midwifery school, for example, people think we're talking about this, but this is not what we're talking about. We are talking about this. So you can see here, hopefully you can see here, I have some other little shapes. Didn't print the best, but some other little shapes, and they are parts work, which I did a really fun session even just today with someone around parts work. I could say more about another time. Shamanic wisdom, pre-colonial medicine ways, and somatic experiencing. There's a million others, but those are the 4 that feel the most important for me to put on here. But you can picture other modalities too, just like filling in this expansive circle, which is the more beautiful midwifery we know is possible. Because in the work that I did with women as a midwife, there were times that it felt like we can't be everything to everyone. I'll say that right up front. We can't be all things to this client. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I did feel like I was missing critical tools for helping her explore herself, her inner world. And I felt like I wasn't always able to help her access her own power in the way that I wanted to, in the way that I feel like is the midwife's duty to do. So that is when I started exploring, studying shamanic practices, applied shamanism, and parts work specifically, which some people call IFS, one and the same. And with those tools, midwives can really help clients explore their selves in a different way that absolutely will impact the birth, but also will impact long-term what it means for them to be mothers. And so when I talk about midwifery and like what is a midwife, I really am talking about someone, not someone who is a guru, not someone who has it all figured out, but somebody who can show up in a way that is grounded and reflect back a woman's power, offer her resources and support and tools so that she can be the most healthy, regulated, powerful version of herself throughout her pregnancy, the birth, and the postpartum time, because it is a sacred window of time where transformation is happening at a rapid pace. And we have known that as human beings for a very long time. Like culturally, midwives have held important roles. If you look across cultures and across history, we knew that women need each other and they need someone who sort of specializes in this area to help keep our communities healthy and help keep our communities whole. And that is about so much more than what this little pink circle here is doing. It's more than what this green circle here is doing, right? Like women often are like, oh, should I go to the hospital and hire a doctor or a midwife? Or should I maybe have a home birth? Like we need I don't like the word holistic, but I might use it right now. A holistic, complete, deep well of support for women in general across the lifespan. But when we're talking about midwifery, talking about the years of childbearing, so fertility, preconception, pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum, and breastfeeding. Some would also argue menopause and helping with kids' health stuff and helping with the elderly and passing on to the next realm. Some midwives definitely take that on as womb to tomb, they call it. And I think that's beautiful. I still mostly am talking about women in the childbearing years when I talk about midwifery. Yeah, what else do I want to say about this? Yeah, other words that I really love, healing, transformation, connection, all come to mind when I'm thinking about what a midwife really is. And this is so much more than a job. I also really like the words witness and guide. And this to me is again about not just the individual, but how as a community we are working functionally or not, right? So like that is to me the role of the midwife is how do we continue forward as a people, as a society, as a community? How do we continue forward in a way that is healthy, that is good, and that is in right relationship to each other and to the land and to life? And so I think it's just so much bigger than what we've been told it is, especially in the United States where midwifery has been colonized. It has been stripped down to parts. It has been, inundated with this kind of Western linear thinking. And I do want to say one other thing though. I want to say so many things. You'll notice that I have the circle around all of it. So I think, it's my perspective, I actually think there's a lot of really interesting things that we have learned as humans in the last few hundred years. And one of them is how to do a cesarean, right? There's some other technologies and tools that obstetrics has to offer, but that is the primary one that has made a huge difference in birth, because there are times when that is the safest way for a baby to be born. And that introduces this really intense problem around decision making, which is when do we do that versus when do we wait? And that problem didn't exist a few hundred years ago. Well, I mean, some would argue like cesareans have been done, but a safe cesarean that doesn't permanently injure / kill a mother is a pretty recent upgrade in the human experience. So now that we have that option, now we have this decision, and there's a lot of infighting and debate around when it's appropriate to do and when it isn't. And that is the case with any tool that we come up with, right? So every tool can be beneficial, but there's always going to be debate and argument around when that tool should be implemented. And so I have that included because I'm not somebody who thinks we should go back to not having this, that this should just be gone. I actually think there's a lot of good here. There's a lot of sacred, incredible tools and advancements here, that the problem isn't the tools. And at eBirth, we've talked about this for a long time, saying that, every tool can be used in a sacred way. It's about the orientation and what it includes or doesn't include. So if somebody is having a cesarean and would like one, needs one, whatever we want, it's one of the good ones, let's call it a good cesarean that we all agree was necessary, which maybe is impossible, but let's, for the sake of it, just roll with me for a second here. How do we also include the spiritual? How do we include the community? How do we include, the intangible, the spirit, the emotional, the mental? How do we include all of that and support a woman through that experience in the most incredible way, the most beautiful way we know is possible? Right now, we are not doing that. And so that's why a lot of people get really angry about hospital birth. And I was one of those people myself. It's like, oh, let's fight the system, which I still, there are moments, right? But now I'm much more interested in this conversation of how do we do this in a way that reflects the worldview that I have outlined here. Because that is what matters to me at the core, and that is what brought me into midwifery. Even though my perception of what the word means has changed, my call into midwifery was to support women, to make the world a better place, because I know that healing women, helping women heal themselves, and being with women through this transformational time has so much power. How do we harness that power for good instead of leaving women more traumatized, and providers themselves also feeling disconnected and burnt out and uninspired, or even like sickened by their work and the way that they operate there, right? So to me, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about midwifery. And it's also one of the reasons I stepped away, because right now the model for this, to my knowledge, doesn't really exist. There aren't communities where this is happening, again, that I'm familiar with. If you know of one, you let me know, where all of this is being brought together in a way that doesn't prioritize just the physical over the emotional or spiritual experience. So I can picture a world where I'm a midwife who, would have been called a home birth midwife, but let's say I'm a midwife who's, low tech. I'm a low tech midwife. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't go with somebody who wanted to be birthing in the hospital. Right now, the reason that can't happen is because of money, is because of insurance. It's because of this like really firm dichotomy we've created between home and hospital. And I can totally picture a world where I'm with someone who's like, you know what, actually, I'm not feeling so comfortable here. I'd actually rather birth in the hospital. And I can show up there and continue to help them in the same exact way, unless we need more help. Like, I can picture that world, but a lot of people can't. So maybe you can help visualize that with me. And then this is the last thing I want to say too, is there's also, I didn't have on here free birth, but there's the free birth world where people are like, women can just have a baby completely on their own without a provider. And that's totally true too. So I just wanted to speak to that for a second. And this morning during a session with somebody, actually, they shared this really cool analogy. They were talking about why they wanted to come to me for parts work when they have done parts work on their own and done lots of inner work and transformational work and, kind of therapy, quote unquote, work with themselves for many years. And they're like, why would I want to see Margo? Why would I want to go do a parts work session with her? And they said, it's kind of like the free birth thing. Like, I could keep doing this on my own. And I've definitely had some amazing experiences and revelations and insights and change. But there might be a point in time when you actually do want support and love and someone to guide you and witness you and maybe bring in a perspective that you couldn't have found on your own. So I just want to say that in the continuum and in the visualization I have of this more beautiful midwifery I know is possible, like, that could also be part of it. Women could choose to have a free birth, and if they change their mind, the community midwife could go over there. But right now, the way that the world works is that if somebody called me right now and said, hey, I was having a free birth, but I actually would really like some support, we live in a culture of blame and litigation and fear, and of all of these things being in discrete categories. And so I wouldn't feel comfortable showing up to somebody that I hadn't met and known, because we've also lost the village, right? So this is getting into some other completely different topic, but this idea of like revillaging and having smaller communities so that there wouldn't be a circumstance where somebody called me who was pregnant that I didn't know as the community midwife, right? So I'm all over the place right now. That's, I guess, what this series is going to be. So if you enjoy being all over the place with me, I got more in store for you. So I don't really know how to wrap this up. How do I wrap this up? I guess I'll wrap this up by saying I'd be curious, anybody who's watching, I would love to know what midwifery means to you. If any of this resonated, if any of it felt like total wackadoo bullshit, yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback and your comments, and I'd love to continue this conversation. Next week, I'm going to be back for episode 3, and what am I going to talk about? Oh, we're going to talk about the wise woman model of care. I'm going to talk about what that looks like when a woman takes full responsibility for her care during pregnancy. some of the ways that can look and what that's looked like for me also as someone who had a baby, has had 2 babies, and what that looked like for me both times, because it was a little bit different each time. So till next week, I hope you all enjoy your middle of January winter vibes. That's it.